Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 11 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, which could not be more gloriously populated by old school staff in the House. So delighted to have you all here today. Mr. Dehoney, you have the con. Amaze us.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I guess the first amazing thing I could tell you is, as you can see, we spent about $50,000 on new clocks so that you all won't be complaining anymore about the time and it won't be spitting. So it's all good. We're delighted to have the opportunity to be here with you this evening. This is year 2 of the biennial budget. So as you know, we rolled this out last year, and so by design, it would be highly irregular if there were major changes to year 2. So I'll just tell you now, there's not. We have modified the way that we put the budget together, and the changes that we made in process, we are going to institutionalize. Prior to this year, the process was really a paper flow exercise. People filled out a whole bunch of pieces of paper, went through a lot of process, and ultimately coming into the administrator's office for some kind of decision on the proposed budget. This year, we all went to Cobblestone in person. I felt it was important for service areas to hear what their colleagues' needs were. Important for all of us to have more of a global understanding of what our challenges are. That process did influence the flow of the budget because some people, upon hearing the global needs of the government, backed off on some things that they were requesting, because they saw kind of where we were, what our priorities are. The presentations that you'll hear tonight will include 8 people. Missy is away this week, so you won't hear from OSI. The staff may be a bit anxious when you hear from them because they do not yet know what's actually in the budget. They only know what they asked for. I can tell you point blank that not everything you hear tonight will be in the budget. That is mathematically impossible. We have this many needs, we have this much money. Our job is to make sure that it is balanced, and Marty and I were meeting today still in the throes of trying to put the budget all the way together because it's got to be all the way balanced. You will get a presentation on April 15th from me. That will be the actual proposed budget. We just got our marijuana excise tax number within the past couple of weeks. In round numbers, it's about 125,000 more than it was the year prior, which says any notion that we have that that's going to be a revenue stream that takes off, we just need to rethink that. Because we've extended hours, it's just not making that much of a difference materially in terms of the big picture. We ask that you hold your questions until everybody has presented. And then we will do our Q&A process tonight, but we'll also, when we get to the actual budget in a month, we'll use the same process as we used before. We'd like you to submit your questions about the budget in writing. We like for them to come to Sarah, Marty, Kim Busselmeyer, and myself. We will formulate all of those. Sarah will send out a report every Friday. These are the questions we got this week. Here's what the answers are. So everyone will see every question that gets asked, and you'll see every answer that we gave. There was a little bit of confusion last year. We'll try to keep that to a minimum this year, in that starting to pose questions after tonight, you can do that, but you haven't heard the budget. you're only hearing what people have requested consideration for. And you're also hearing what's on our horizon in the next 2 to 3 years. We felt like it is important for you to have a view of that so that our needs are clear and you'll understand the efforts that we're taking to generate more revenue to cover some of the needs that we have. So with that, Marty can come up. She will be our first presenter, and everyone else will just flow after her.
Good evening. I have the pleasure this evening of kicking off our discussion by covering our fiscal year 25 budget plan and fiscal outlook. I'll begin by quickly covering some process reminders as well as our budget calendar. You'll see that we start out this evening by hearing from various units on the updates to our originally presented plan, as well as horizon issues. Then we move on to April 15th, where Mr. Dohoney will present his recommended budget to council. In addition, council will hear first reading of ordinance changes that are required for our utility rate updates. Then on May 6th, we'll hold public hearings required for the budget, ordinance, and fee changes. And on that same evening, we'll conduct second readings on ordinance and rate changes. That all culminates on the evening of May 20th, when City Council will consider and adopt the fiscal year 25 budget, as well as the related fee changes that coincide with that budget. Simultaneously, each year, an operating budget and capital budget are adopted. The budget that is brought forward to council for consideration incorporates council policies, staff expertise, as well as public input. The major policies we adhere to in recommending a budget to council include those listed here on the slide, as well as some others. On the evening of May 20th, it takes 7 votes of council to adopt the budget, and only 6 votes required to amend the recommended budget on that evening. Whereas an adopted budget during the fiscal year will require 8 votes of council to amend. If the presented budget is not approved by council on May 20th, Mr. Dohoney's recommended budget goes into effect. The city does not adopt a line item budget. We adopt a budget by fund in total, with the exception of the general fund, where we adopt a budget by service area, or what we internally refer to as agency. It is typical each year at the last meeting of the fiscal year, the second meeting in June, City Council considers a budget amendment to address unanticipated expenses that happen during the year to ensure compliance with state law. Next, I'll provide you some financial background that may be helpful as we develop strategies going forward. Listed in the left-hand column of this slide, you'll see the city millages that are being levied. Overall, we have authorization to levy up to 23 mills, and we currently are levying just under 21.5 mills, leaving a levying capacity of just over 1.5 mills. As a point of reference, a mill in fiscal year 24 generated $7.1 million. The right-hand column on the slide will reflect what the city is currently levying due to the Headley rollback, which requires local governments to reduce its millage levy when annual growth on existing property exceeds the rate of inflation. Our total tax levy for the current fiscal year was 17.7 mills. Currently, the city holds over $273 million in debt. The largest debt category of $116 million is the revolving loan category. Revolving loans are a state-run program that we are able to take advantage of that offers advantageous financing options for the city. For most of the past decade, for our utility enterprises, we've utilized this state-run program instead of going to market on our own. It's a cheaper option for the city. Going to market for bonds can be a quite expensive endeavor. Next, we have $97 million in general obligation bonds. That includes debt that we incur for capital improvements. Some examples would include the court's PD facility, the Wheeler Maintenance Facility, and most recently, the road bonds that we issued. The graph on the right-hand side of the slide represents when that existing debt will roll off. And you'll notice within 15 years, the majority of our debt will come off the books. Next up, we'll go over the assumptions that we assumed in the budget plan and the reasoning behind those assumptions. Over 50% of the general fund revenue is generated from real and personal property taxes. We are forecasting to generate $76 million. That includes a 6% increase for fiscal year '25. Thereafter, for fiscal years '26 through '29, we're forecasting a 3% increase each year. As you may recall from the previous slide that we discussed on the millage capacity, legislation is in place that limits the local government on growth. We are limited to a 5% cap on existing property, plus new development. When we incorporate the anticipated additions and losses as forecasted by our assessing department, we are projecting that 6% increase, resulting in an additional $3.2 million. We'll talk more about our revenue, tax value and revenue on the next slide up. So we'll just move on to our next largest revenue category, which is state shared revenue. That revenue is estimated to account for $13 million in fiscal year '25. And that comes in two distinctive categories, either constitutional or statutory. The constitutional portion is the larger of the two, and that is allowed by Michigan's Constitution and is our share of Michigan's 6% sales tax. That accounts for $11 million of the $13 million we are projecting. We are benefiting from some increased state allocations in fiscal year '25, therefore are increasing our projections to 25% for that fiscal year. We're then projecting to maintain relatively flat for '26 through '29. On the statutory side, that program is also previously known as CVTRS, or City Village Tax Revenue Sharing. It's a supplemental program that is available to local agencies who meet eligibility requirements. The city meets those requirements, and we strive to do so, and that generates an additional approximately $2 million. We are then projecting to increase that 3% each year annually after that. Our overall economy and the city's state shared revenue is dependent on consumer spending. Although spending has remained strong through the inflationary period, we are seeing signs that spending is slowing. Consumer debt has significantly increased and affordability is becoming an issue. Interest rates remain high and stimulus and COVID savings have been exhausted. Therefore, we are remaining cautiously optimistic in revenue forecasting. Finally, on the revenue side, we are continuing to forecast a rebound of parking revenue, and we're estimating a 16% increase for fiscal year '25. For the remainder of the 5-year plan, we're estimating a 3% increase for each year. As promised, this slide represents our taxable value and revenue history. Our general operating tax revenue is represented by the blue bars on the slide. And if you refer to the left axis here, you'll see that our revenue stream has seen modest growth year over year of about 2 to 6%. However, when you compare 2016 at $52.5 million to fiscal year '25's fiscal year '24, $73 million, that represents a significant increase to the revenue stream. The orange line on the chart represents the net percentage increase in taxable value, which includes growth and losses. So if you refer to the axis on the vertical axis on the right hand of the slide, you'll see the percentage increase. So in fiscal year '22, what we're not seeing is a decrease of taxable value, but a decrease in the change from the previous year. So in fiscal years '20 and '21, we saw increases of 6% and 5% respectively, and those were as a result of developments coming online. But then in '22, we saw a decrease in the growth rate, and we were down to a 3% growth rate. So we are forecasting the growth rate to continue to grow, mostly due to inflation, but it does indeed include some new development. So in addition to new development, we also experience things that come off the tax roll. So if a property comes off the tax roll because it's purchased by a non-taxable entity, or in the event there are legislative changes that occurred, like that occurred in 2023, in which the personal property exemption cap was increased, so we can no longer collect as much tax on personal property as we have previously. Now, moving on to the expenditure side of the plan, we are experiencing labor and benefit increases that not only impact our internal costs, but also our other charges and contracted services. We're projecting a 2.6% increase in fiscal year '25 for personnel and a 3% each year thereafter. On fringes, 8.7 for fiscal year '25, and then a total of 6.8 between '26 and '29. As we move on to other services and contracted work, we're projecting a 8.69 increase for fiscal year '25 and 3.7 for the next 3-year period. We still are experiencing supply chain issues and contractor capacity issues that are driving some prices in those areas. As we take a look at the overall financial picture, the top portion of the slide represents our forecasted recurring revenue and expenditures. And you'll see in fiscal year '25, we're in a good situation where recurring revenue is exceeding recurring expenditures. However, using the assumptions that we discussed on the previous slide, by fiscal year '27, we are then in a situation where our recurring operational expenses are exceeding our operational revenues. This is a situation we'll be looking to solve for in subsequent cycle, and cautions us from adding any recurring expenditures without appropriate revenue offsets or reduction in expenditures. On the bottom of section of the slide, you see the one-time revenue and expenditures, which are possible because in fiscal year '25, we have exceeding recurring revenues. However, we still then have to stay in compliance with our fund balance policy, which is the 15% to 20% of recurring expenditures in the general fund. As a credit to the financial team, past and present, the city is in good financial shape, and it's reflected in these key performance measures. Each year, our financial statements, as well as our financial practices, are audited with a goal of no material weaknesses, which we have a record of achieving. There is only one level above AA+ for bond ratings that we have currently in wastewater and general obligation. Therefore, we are able to issue debt at the most favorable financial situation. As we discussed on the previous slide, matching recurring revenue and expenditures are a sign of financial health and oversight, therefore is an important component of our annual budget process. In addition to maintaining our fund balance to comply with established policy, it is a key sign of financial discipline and health. And you'll see here that each year we are reporting above our required minimum fund balance. However, we typically are actually running right around 20%. It's really a reflection of timing the expenditures across fiscal years. And finally, our pension and retiree health care funding ratios are considered excellent and very healthy, and they are attributable to the city's funding policies on those plans and the diligent oversight of the pension board. My presentation this evening has focused mainly on the general fund. However, I'll end with a couple of comments on a few of our enterprise funds. As part of our annual budget process, we go through similar financial processes for each fund. In the case of the utility funds, the process generates a rate plan, which typically requires an annual adjustment. This cycle, we plan to remain within the plan we shared with you last year, which will result in user rate increases that you will consider for 6% for water, 3% for sanitary sewer, and 3% for stormwater. Our next presenter, Brian Steglitz, Public Services Area Administrator will discuss further plan in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. As Ms. Prasan said, I will go through the public services area budget impacts and horizon issues. I will start with the budget impacts. Before I start, I would like to recognize the public services area team who is here tonight to support me, to answer all of your difficult questions, which we'll be hearing about later on in the evening. I heard from one of our unit managers who said that they haven't been in council chambers in several years, so I'm very happy to have provided that opportunity to them tonight. So I'll start with the general fund. We have two budget impacts of note for fiscal year '25. The first is to do a condition assessment at Barton Dam. You've probably seen, we've been talking a lot about Barton Dam, and there's a project that will be coming before you shortly to do some repairs. It's currently out to bid on some of the embankment, but we haven't really addressed yet the structural concrete issues at the dam. The dam was built in the early 1900s, and if you can see in this picture, that's a picture of the sidewall of the hydro facility. And does this cursor work? Okay, yes. If you can see over here, there are these bars that are exposed. So those are structural rebar, which is part of the integrity of the wall. So as part of our last 5-year safety inspection that's done by the regulator, they've identified these things as things that we need to investigate, hence the request to do the assessment in this coming fiscal year. The cost of the assessment is about $120,000, so this is half of it. The funding of the work that happens at Barton Dam is split between the water fund and the general fund, because the dam provides power, which is part of the general fund, which takes the revenue from the power generation, and then the water fund, because the impoundment provides the impoundment for the city's water supply. So you'll see that on my water fund slide, where you'll see the additional $60,000. The other item we identified here is support for art fair. We do a lot of things to help make sure art fair is successful, the city does, and the associations that lead that have asked for some support based on some of the expenses that's incurred that are typically reimbursed by the art fair. So we're asking consideration from council to support art fair in the amount of $25,000. Well, that's a one-time ask. We would anticipate that it would likely become a recurring request from the associations, but it's part of this budget request. It's just for fiscal year '25. Moving on to the engineering fund, private development. This is the one area in public services where we're seeking an additional FTE. That FTE is to support our plan review process. We have currently have a pretty substantial backlog of private development plan reviews, and we also anticipate a lot more coming down the road. We're currently supporting one FTE, full-time contract support person from a consulting firm to help us maintain the backlog. So this would be able to provide some offset to actually the consulting services that we're using to provide those services currently. In the water fund, we have 3 items. The first one is the other half of the condition assessment of the concrete work at Barton Dam. The next item is $275,000 for water system repair parts. So these are things like hydrants, valves, service connections, and appurtenances we use for doing work in the water system. We have in our base budget that has been approved as part of the 2-year budget cycle, we already have $500,000 allotted for this item. So this is in addition to what is identified in our current budget. And the rationale for it is primarily, one, inflation. We've seen significant cost increases in some of these components. And also, when we're doing a lot of the engineering work, replacing water mains as part of engineering projects that we have throughout the city, we like to get ahead of those and replace some of this infrastructure to make sure that we're set up for success. So that might be replacing valves that we're not sure are going to work beforehand to make sure we can get good shutdowns, that type of work. And this is what this request will fund. And then the third item is water distribution system model and plan. This plan has already come before council and was approved, but it will be coming out of the an additional ask for the water fund for fiscal year '25. I did want to mention that all of these additional fund-related impacts would be captured in the increases that Ms. Prashant talked about previously during her presentation. So this wouldn't require additional rate increases for any of the utility funds. The next one is the Stormwater Fund. Stormwater Comprehensive Plan. This plan was part of our budget request for the 2-year budget. But we are, from a logistical standpoint, a little behind schedule. So what we're seeking to do is to flip-flop the FY24 and FY25 funding allowances for this project. So this would allow us to make the project whole in fiscal year '25 an additional $166,000. That's $166,000 that we won't be spending in fiscal year '24. So it's really just a moving of funds from one fiscal year to the next. And then the third is the Sanitary Fund. This is an initiating a project that wasn't identified in the previous budget, 2-year budget cycle. It's about a $500,000 project, so it's over 2 fiscal years. The first fiscal year is $350,000. And what you'll see when I talk about horizon issues a little later on in the presentation, we're working on doing some comprehensive planning in all 3 funds. You saw the water distribution, the sanitary, and the storm. And we're finding that we have a real need in order to make sure that we can stay ahead of what we may be seeing in terms of development in some of these areas. And when you'll hear from Mr. Fournier later to talk about economic development and incentivizing growth in the city, we need to make sure that the utilities are well positioned to be able to handle that. And that's the rationale for moving this project forward. Moving on to the streets funds, we have two funds that we'll all be discussing, the majors and the locals. On the majors, we have some vehicle replacements. This has already come before you, so it's more of a refresher, the $1.4 million to replace several vehicles as part of our public works fleet. And those vehicles will be coming out of the right-of-way maintenance that is budgeted at $7.5 million. So $1.4 million of the $7.5 million has already now been dedicated towards those vehicle replacements. The next item is road diet evaluations. This came from a council directive for us to come up with a plan to evaluate road diets on majors before 2030. And we've identified a 4-year plan to do that. This is the funding we would request for year 1. You can see it's $150,000. We already have $100,000 in the budget. So this will just augment that to be able to handle what we think we need in year 1 to do that evaluation. That $150,000 would be programmed to come out of our capital maintenance budget, which is established at $650,000, and that's used for things like crack sealing on major roads. So we'll be doing a little less of that in order to accommodate this request by council. And then on the locals, we have $500,000 in traffic calming. We have $250,000 budgeted for traffic calming initiatives in the county mental health millage that gets allocated for this purpose. The additional $500,000 would allow us to get caught up with the backlog of ones that have already been evaluated that you've seen and now we need to do implementation of. So this will help us move forward. We're struggling with the backlog. There's a lot of demand for this program, so that's going to be something I'll talk a little bit about on horizon issues that we need to be thinking about a funding source for that in the future if it's something that we're going to continue to support. For this year, in fiscal year '25, we would propose the $500,000 to come out of the fund balance from resurfacing. So this is some balance that hasn't been used from a previous year that's now available. So it's important to note that when we're doing these types of initiatives, the size of the pie is fixed. So if we're doing more of one thing like traffic calm, then we have to take it away from something. And in this case, it would be doing some road resurfacing. So there's sort of that natural tension between different multiple priorities. And it would take almost half of what the balance is that exists in the resurfacing fund from the previous year. Moving on to the solid waste fund, we have 3 vehicle replacements that are due. Right now, we're actually struggling with keeping some of our fleet in service, and that really is a service delivery issue for us. So this is a pretty important priority in order to get these vehicles replaced. So that's an important ask. The next one is route optimization software for our solid waste vehicles. We haven't looked at the routes in over a decade. We've had a fair bit of growth. And this also provides us an opportunity to look at efficiencies. So if we can optimize the routes, there's an opportunity to potentially reduce equipment costs and potentially overtime for the folks who are working on those routes. So we think it's good investment in order to get current with what the current service area that we're serving. And then the third item is some temporary staff to help support our fall compost collection. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but obviously when we have all of the bags put out, having some temporary staff to help us get through the routes, which is really difficult to get through during the compost season. We're typically working over. Having the additional staff support there helps us become more efficient and get done within the appropriate amount of time. At the city administrator's request, we have taken a look with our Public Works team about how can we improve our response to snow removal. We know that was a sensitive issue for a lot of you and your constituents this winter. We've had a couple challenging storms to deal with. So in this budget request for next year, we're asking for an additional $500,000 to do a few things. One is to use contract services to help support some of the work that we're doing, particularly in the local areas. I think, as you all know, we're focusing primarily when we're doing snow removal on the majors and the safe routes to school. So the locals tend to trail. This contract assistance would allow us to have a contractor work in the local areas while we're working on the majors and help us get in that space faster. And we think that would improve our response. We also are proposing to look at additional salting on local roads. So this is something that we have the capacity to do. The cost really is for the additional media that we'd be using, the salt. There is an environmental impact to this, so it's something that we want to be intentional about if this is something that we want to do, but we did want to raise it as an option for consideration. And the third item is to use contract support to help address right-of-ways and refuge islands. This is something that right now Parks is helping us to support. So if we were contracting this out, that would free up some of their staff to work on things that they need to be doing, which is getting the parks cleared and the paths cleared. So we think that that's an appropriate use of resources, is to contract some of that out. And then the last item, which I know I've heard a lot from council about, is looking at how we can keep vehicles off the streets so we can be more efficient at getting the streets cleared. So we're working, and I think some of you are also working with legal on what that would look like, but we do have the ability to implement emergency conditions where we can ban cars from parking on the street, alternate day street parking. So there's a lot of different options that we'll be looking at and that we'll bring forth for your consideration to implement next winter. There really wouldn't be a material cost to that, but we would want to make sure that there was adequate enforcement in order to make sure that it's effective. In the absence, I know I'm not nearly as dynamic as Missy, but I'm going to give you my best here. But the municipal energy utility. So this is a request in the budget to do the phase 2 study to get an appraisal of DCT assets. We estimate that could cost upwards of 7 figures. This would be an important step if the community at some point decides to bring a ballot initiative together to look at moving forward with the formation or the exploration of a public energy utility for Ann Arbor. So this is a step that we've identified to be included in the fiscal year 25 budget for your consideration. So those are the budget impacts. Now I will quickly move on to the horizon issues. So I talked about the structural issues at the dams. We have 4 dams I think you're familiar with. They were all built in the early 1900s. We're facing some similar issues at all of them. Some of the challenges that we have, 2 of the dams are funded by portionally the general fund, are 2 that have hydropower, but the other 2 dams, Gettys and Arbor, are currently funded by Parks millage. And there's a tension there because the money that we tend to use for the dams takes away from the important things that we need to do in the parks. So that's going to be a horizon issue that we think that we're going to need to discuss as the needs for the dams are going to become greater as they age, and they're not cheap, as you can imagine. So figuring out a funding source so we can make sure that we can sustainably keep the dams in good repair and also be able to maintain parks at the service level that our community expects is going to be an important issue for us to consider down the road. Apologize for the fuzzy picture here, but this is a picture of Gettys Dam, which has Old Dixboro Road going over it, and then the new Dixboro Road, which is the elevated one. So these are both owned and operated by the Washtenaw County Road Commission. The old Dixboro Road used to go all the way through. It crossed the train tracks. Now it dead ends there, so you can't go all the way through. Really, the old Dixboro Road Bridge now serves two purposes. One is to provide access to Gallup Park, because there's a trail on the other side, and the other is to help service the dam. So we use it to maintain the dam and the infrastructure associated with it, such as the gates. That bridge has been deteriorating. The Washtenaw County Road Commission doesn't have resources to invest in keeping it in good repair. They've recently derated it, and they put Jersey barriers, so now it's a single lane bridge as opposed to a two-lane bridge. And that's their strategy moving forward. That, in the long run, is not going to work for the city because we need to maintain the load rating to enable us to do the work that we need to do. Like, we had to get a crane out there, which we had to do several years ago when we had a gate failure. So we were going to be investigating, what does that mean for the city? They would like us to take ownership over it. They say they'll give us a really, really good price. I think they'll just give it to us, actually. And that would be a liability that we would be incurring in the long run. And based on the current funding for the Gettys Dam, the bridge would also likely, at this current state of, be funded by the Parks millage, which would be another challenge for Parks. So we need to look at this in the long run and figure out, what our strategy is if we are going to have to take ownership of that. And again, it's a horizon issue that we'll need to explore. On solid waste. So a few items there. One is a drop-off station. I think you all know it's something that we're working on. We're hoping to bring something to you for your consideration over the coming months. We've been working with a consultant and our partners, including Recycle and Arbor, to come up with what we think a financially sustainable solution is for having a drop-off station serve the region, because this would be not just an Ann Arbor facility, but a regional facility. So it's something that we're working on, but we want also, the reason I'm raising this as a horizon issue is solid waste is a single millage, and we keep on asking more of it. We know that we want to expand our circular economy. We want to potentially consider growing commercial composting, these services, and all of them will cost additional resources. We know we're exploring right now when we do move out for the University of Michigan, which will be happening soon, having some circular economy components there, so we're not just throwing everything away. Unfortunately, it's a lot cheaper just to throw everything away. But if we want to explore opportunities like this, then we're going to have to figure out how we're going to be able to fund them. And there's a lot of tension and pull on solid waste right now to do all these different things. On the street funds, I think last year we put in about 12 miles of bicycle lanes, and we're anticipated to do maybe 5 more miles this year. We've been able to absorb that with our current staff. We had basically one person who's dedicated to dealing with keeping them clean and maintaining the bike facilities. As we continue to add more, that's going to put some stress on our streets funds from a maintenance standpoint, and at some point, you'll see when I talk about future staff needs, possibly another FTE need. When we add, little bits at a time, it doesn't necessarily, each individual item doesn't require the need for another FTE, but at some point you reach the tipping point. We're approaching the tipping point. Also on the streets funds, I talked about resurfacing versus competing needs. We know we have a road bond. We know we have a really strong community feel for getting the roads in good condition and getting our PACER ratings up, and we're working aggressively to try to move that forward as best we can. But there's all the other demands like pedestrian safety that will compete against those funds. So that's going to be a challenge. That tension in the future is, if we want to really advance our resurfacing needs, then it could impact how much we can do in some of these other areas. So something that we'll need to be continuing to talk about with you all. And then the trunk line study. We know this is, I think there'll be a council work session on this coming up over the course of the next few months. But this is basically the city taking over ownership of some or all of the MDOT trunk lines that go through the city. There's a lot of benefit to the city for taking control of it, but there's this fairly substantial cost. And you'll see that in the study. the state shared revenue that we get and the condition that the trunk lines will be delivered to the city in likely wouldn't be sustainable financially with our current funding model. We would have to be stealing resources from other things in order to keep those new trunk lines maintained. So you don't get enough when the ownership is transferred over to you from MDOT in order to meet what we think the city's expectations of condition for those are. So we'll have, I'm sure, a robust conversation about that, but that's a horizon issue we'll need to be discussing. For the utility fund, so on the water side, I think you're quite familiar with this because we just came to you for approval of the water strategic plan. But we're in the year, I think this greenish color, where I didn't mean to do that. In the treatment recommendations, so 23, 24, that's where we're evaluating right now. We will be continuing where our pilot plant is up and running. We're still working out some bugs, but over the course of the next year, we intend to get a lot of good data that will help inform the decisions that we need to make in terms of what does the rehabilitation of the water treatment look like for the next several generations. So that's really what you'll be seeing over the course of the next year. The utility system capacity analyses, those are the three analyses that I mentioned on our three different utilities. Those are going to be really important. Historically, we've taken the position where we don't really augment the system. We require developers to pay for what it costs to build the capacity to serve them. If we were going to be serious as a community about incentivizing economic development, do we want to be ahead of that? We need to be sensitive about what BOLT allows us to do in terms of making investments in the system and how that cost gets distributed amongst our ratepayers. But what we're finding with some of the developments that we've been seeing that are large, particularly on the sanitary side, where there's not sufficient capacity to serve some of these new developments, the cost, it really becomes a barrier to get into the city and build. Because the costs are so substantial to improve the system to be able to accommodate. So probably an appropriate conversation to be having is there, do we want to be thinking about making some investments so we're more friendly to allow folks who want to develop to be able to get in and the capacity exists? Because in some of these cases, the capacity could take years for us to build, and that might not meet the timeline for people who want to come and invest in the city. So definitely a horizon issue, and that sort of ties into the economic development and zoning change that we've been discussing. On the water system, so two figures here, and I'm getting close. On the water mains by decade installed, so the one on the bottom, you'll see that there's sort of a big hump, and that's in the 1940s, 50s, 60s timeline where most of our buried infrastructure was built. And unfortunately, when you do the math and you look at what the life expectancy of that is, you'll see a big hump in the 2020s to 2040s, which we're just starting. So we, in order to stay sort of current and replace the infrastructure at the right time, we have a big investments that we're going to be making. This is in the drinking water buried infrastructure over the course of the next couple decades, and we're right at the beginning of it now. We haven't been replacing things at the right rate in order for us for this to be sustainable. And as you see, as we get to the 2040s, we're talking about almost 50% of the buried infrastructure in the city is going to be reaching the end of its life over the next couple of decades. We can't do that all in 10 years or 20 years. Not only would it just be hugely disruptive to the community, but we don't have the financial resources either. So we need to come up with a strategy to address this in a prioritized manner and to make sure that we are able to, and this is not unique to Ann Arbor, this is facing utilities all over the country are facing the same thing because there's a lot of growth in the post-war eras. So the time, though, to start thinking about and planning for it is now. So on staffing, I've mentioned private development, the FTE that we've asked for this year. Depending upon what the future holds in terms of continual growth and economic development, we anticipate that there could be additional needs in that group and our transportation group. The University of Michigan and Ann Arbor Public Schools are both embarking on very aggressive capital investment campaigns, which has a burden on our staff to make sure that we're staying on top of their schedule and reviewing things appropriately, and that requires resources. And we think that it's possible we'll need a conversation in a future year about augmenting our staff to support some of the growth things that we're seeing in the community. And then on Public Works, that was the person that I talked about, as we sort of change our transportation infrastructure to be pedestrian-friendly, adding bicycle infrastructure, it changes a little bit how we do our work. And we may need some additional folks in the future to help support some of the maintenance activities with the sort of reconfigured infrastructure that we have in the city. Sustainable energy utility. We anticipate, as council considers a ballot initiative for this over the coming months, depending upon the results of that, if there is support in the community for forming a sustainable energy utility, a future FTE will be needed to lead that. That currently, Missy Stoltz has in her climate millage and set aside a budget for this position, so it's sort of held in reserve currently. And once we got out of the gate and actually the utility became sustainable, then the rates from the utility would support that position. But we would need some resources, likely from the climate millage, to support that FTE initially out of the gate. I think this may be my last slide, but on the tree line trail, this is something that was adopted by council in 2017. And there's a collaborative agreement between the city and the Tree Line Conservancy. We haven't dedicated a lot of resources to this, but if this is something that is an important priority for council at some point in the future, there will need to be resources allocated in order to realize the vision. And this is actually my last slide. I promise this time. So I'm not going to spend it, but this is the money, right? Started with the money, ending with the money, Marty. So we're working on a lot of things, and we've been really successful. I'll call out our transportation group, who's done an excellent job of getting other resources historically to support their work. Safe Streets for All is an example. We're going to continue to pursue grant opportunities to help get all of the things done, and what I've listed here is some areas where we will be focusing in the future. But really the number one thing is the water treatment plant rehab. We're talking about one of the largest projects in the history of the city, and definitely in the history of the city's water system, over $100 million. So we'll need to be looking at what type of grant opportunities we can to support that. That's going to be a major priority. It's been a priority for Mr. Fournier in talking about earmarks when we're sort of greasing the skids for things in the future. But there's also a lot of opportunities in DC through lots of different programs that are available for utility projects of this size, so we'll be pursuing that. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Delacourt.
I always love going after Brian. It's a reminder how grateful I am. I don't have anywhere near as many funds as he has to deal with. Second year of a 2-year budget. We did not, per direction, and like most years, did not make a lot of changes. Are not proposing a lot of impacts for the general fund. We are talking about horizon issues across the board for us. In the planning and development area, the number one thing we're going to have to deal with in the coming years is going to be the adoption of the comprehensive plan and the costs that are going to be associated with that. We're not proposing anything this year. We are asking for, we are losing 2 long-term staff planners that have about 57 years of experience between the 2 of them. We have talked about and are proposing to replace those with 3 entry-level planners out of the general fund. Our costs are covered from what we save in retirement funds. So that is going to be our big change in the planning and development coming up, is the replacement of 2 with hopefully 3 going forward. We're going to have to work hard in balancing those concerns, or those. The big issue that's going to come is the balance between council priorities and the planning commission work plan, making sure everybody's in line. There's going to be a lot of work that comes out of that plan, and making sure we understand how to implement that is probably going to be what's most important. The planning process, as difficult as it is going to be easy in comparison to the adoption of the ordinances that are necessary to implement it. And we think once that plan's done at the end of the year coming up, as we've seen recently with TC1 and some of the other ordinances, really working with the community to develop and adopt those ordinances are going to take a lot of time and effort. And we just want everybody to realize that as we go forward with that, it's going to take a lot of patience as we bring that forward to implement whatever those results are. We're not proposing any big changes in the budget. Like I said, we've worked with Milton, try to make sure the staffing's there and that the savings we get from retirements will replace the planning department staff that's there. But the majority of their time now is spent moving projects through the system. The time and effort it's going to take to engage with the community, to work with them on the adoption and the implementation of the plan goals, turning those into ordinances and codifying them in a way that is actually implementable with all the other things we've heard that go into that, utilities and everything else, is going to probably be a longer process than everybody realizes, and it's going to take capacity. So we're not going to be able to implement. We're going to get done with the plan, and everybody's going to be very excited. And the plan's going to have a lot of things it wants to do in it. And making sure that we take those in an order and in a way that we have the capacity to implement well is going to be what's important when that's finished. So again, not a lot of budget issues here, but just a conversation over the coming years about the capacity of the planning department, the loss of those planners. We have about 5 planners right now. We know the majority of their time, even with the replacements, are going to be spent on moving projects through the system. We've heard those are important to revenue. So we will have a lot of conversations about that, but we appreciate hopefully the ability to replace those 2 long-term planners with the 3 entry-level positions and grow that department. Building and rental, this is relatively easy for us. It comes out of the construction fund. This is one of the funds other than the general fund we have that pays for things. We took a little pause through COVID and we're kind of waited to see what that impact that was going to have on the projects and the development that came through the system. We saw very little slowdown through COVID and it's seen an increase since. So what we're talking about is using the construction fund. It has a healthy balance. It continues to grow. We have proposed in this year's budget to add 3 trade inspectors, which you would think would be simple enough to do. We have a hard time finding qualified trade inspectors now. We spend quite a bit of money supplementing that with contractors to try to keep up with demand. The importance of inspectors is really significant in that, one, it keeps projects moving. When we can't get out to a site, when we can't get the inspections done, the project slows down. That causes backlog for everybody. Doesn't help our reputation in the community. And 2, it's an encouragement or it's an inducement for them to skip the inspections altogether and move on with the project, which we all know what kind of problem that can cause. We have the demand for these inspectors. We're talking about 3 trade inspectors in the mechanical plumbing area to increase that. The other thing we're doing is we had hoped that the implementation of Stream would simplify the process to the point where we wouldn't need to handhold folks as much as we did. We do, it's different, and the folks we have to handhold are a little different, but what we're also proposing is hiring a permit liaison that would be someone who is a single point of contact for anybody moving a building permit through the system. Right now, a building permit sounds like a relatively simple thing, but it can touch on 5, 6 different areas in the city. And for those who are less skilled or those who utilize or use our software less, it can become a difficult process. So what we're hoping to do is bring one person in who is there to constantly pick up the phone, meet with people at the counter, help them find where their permit is in the process, especially when we're dealing with the smaller residential building community. We have a lot of residents who pull their own permits to do work. That can be a daunting situation in any community. So we're hopeful that that person can be someone to help them get through the system easily, answer all those questions. So that's there as well. All of those positions are designed to help improve customer service. It does touch on the work that John and the city administrator's office is doing on improving process and economic development. We think the number one way we can do that is help people get through the process. And then the other thing we're considering is I haven't even told Milton this yet, but I stuck it on the slide because I was hoping you would tell him it was a great idea, is maybe spending a little bit of the construction fund on an audit of the department. There are places that we can go, and we're probably at the point with Stream implementation, maybe considering bringing in an outside resource to audit how our process works, everything we do. Not something that's designed to find fault, but to find ways we can find efficiencies and improve the process throughout the department. So we are thinking about doing that. It would come out of the construction fund, not the general fund, but we think with these positions in place that we can do that. We also put in there, and I didn't put it on the slide, it is really hard for us to find positions in the building department and the trade inspections. We've put in $100,000 one-time cost this year to help HR do direct recruiting of inspection staff. So with 3 or 4 positions hiring, we think that's a good expense, and think it'll be worthwhile to get them all in here at the same time. Rental service, our whole goal is always we're able to do about 6,000 rental inspections a year. I think we have 30,000 rental units. We try to get them in every 2 to 3 years. The math just doesn't add up. We have 6 rental inspectors. We're not asking for it this year. They're paid for out of the general fund. But our goal is to show, COVID set us back, but to show that each individual rental inspector is able to cover their own costs. And then hopefully next year, if we're able to demonstrate that, we'll be back asking for some more. We'd really like to get into the rental properties more often. So, and also we've seen with the Renters Commission and some other things, we'd like to be able to get to those concerns on a more regular basis as well. This is what keeps me up at night, as I've told Milton, and everybody hears me running around screaming and banging on tables at City Hall about. I appreciate Brian's comments. The Public Service Department and Brian have been excellent in these conversations. We have a capital shortfall in parks that is coming to fruition over the next 20 or 30 years. That is significant. I will add on the Dixboro Bridge, the county was nice enough. We actually offered to take the bridge if they would just bring it up to standard, and I think they told us no, which I was a little disappointed with. I didn't want to take it in the first place, but we have these things in the dam rehabilitations, the Dixboro Bridge. The ADA is a known cost. That's $20 million in today's dollars. As we implement those improvements over the next 20 years, that's going to get more expensive. We've started a capital study this year with a company to study all of Parks' capital assets. We anticipate conservatively $75 million in costs to come out of that. Hopefully it's not much more, but it's going to be a significant cost. We know right now we have playgrounds at the end of life, veterans rank needs help. These are examples of all the costs that are going to come due over the next 10 or 20 years that the current funding sources, there isn't enough money to cover them all. And we are going to work with Milton over the next year to bring, not this year, but hopefully next year, a funding plan for at least the next 5 or 10 years, how to start to tackle these items in a reasonable manner. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to deteriorate, fall apart, and become more costly. The way we want to look at that is obviously there is no one magic bullet that's going to fix this for parks. We've started the capital study. One of the initial things we want to talk about is the parks millage comes due in '26 for renewal. We are not currently looking at increasing that. We are working with finance about the potential to extend the years of it. I think it's 6 years right now. If we extend the years of it, we may be able to bond against it in a manner that would allow us to raise some capital to do some things without raising the cost of the millage. Obviously, our fee evaluation is going to have to be part of that. Sponsorship grants, public partnerships. I think council talked about it the other night. Not only the golf courses, but I think an evaluation of park-owned property to see if there's anything that could be monetized or generate revenue, potentially to meet other council priorities, whether it's sustainability, whether it's affordable housing, that would help recoup revenue for the park system. We don't want to get there, but are there services that are outdated or are no longer necessary for the community? And then lastly, once all of those things have been evaluated, do we have to look at an additional millage or bond in the short term to pay for some of these capital assets before they get to the point where they're not recuperable, where they're not able to be repaired and actually more costly? That is Parks' priority over the next year. That's what we are thinking about over the next year. We hope to have a more thought-through plan on how to accomplish this next year, but we wanted to put it out there this year as something to think forward about, and give you guys all something to think about this year. That is all I have today. Like I said, we did ask for 1 FTE in Parks. That was paid for through moving some funding sources around between existing funds. There's no additional cost to the general fund. Milton was kind enough to approve that already, and we're already in the hiring process for that. But other than that, we've really had no significant impact on the general fund this year. we think that conversation for us comes next year through the parks conversation. So with that, I didn't bring my staff because they like me better when I don't ask them to come here, and that's important to me. But we will certainly answer any questions you have at the end.
Good evening. I'm here to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion through the Office of Organizational Equity. I'm going to start off with what we are not. We are not located in or under HR. We're a standalone office, and we do get a lot of confusion about, wait, you're not a part of HR? No, we're located, our offices are there, but we are standalone, and I'll talk about why we're standalone as we go forward. So the first thing we'd like to do is increase our visibility, engagement, and knowledge of the OOE and implementation of our expertise. We need to create some branding. We've got some great Parks and Rec branding and lots of other areas that are branded, and so that's something that we're looking to do next year, and we are dedicated to participating in community events. That will give us strengthened stakeholder engagement and a connectivity to the community that we're still working to develop. I've been here almost 18 months now. Professional development. Our accessibility coordinator needs to go to conferences once a year to maintain the certification that they are currently finishing up. We have a couple of other small things that individually we have. I'm a certified diversity executive, things like that. Just continuing to stay in the front of our DEI journey. And I know my plan is to position Ann Arbor as the leader in DEI AJ+ in public service. Next, where I was kind of referring to, wait, we're located, but we're not. Everything begins with equity. Every one of our offices and departments and areas here in the city as employees, we belong in, and we are in. We talk to individuals from every department almost every day in helping guide the way that equity is brought into things. We want to empower my colleagues to seamlessly integrate DEI AJ+ into reports, reviews, project programs. We're creating easy checklists and training, and we're also looking to kind of partner this in with future initiatives such as performance appraisals that are coming through to the city. That will, of course, bring better informed decision-making through data utilization, and it will improve our accountability and transparency. Right now, we're running around with, wait, who was over that, or who would be in charge of this if we were going to do it in some areas? And so having everyone understand which way we're walking down a path would help in doing the accountability and transparency. Also looking to create an OOE ambassador. If you don't notice, I love acronyms. Infusing DEIJ+ in every area of the city. So what that would do is we would have one city staff in each area who we train, basically bring up in a small credentialing kind of way. We've got our new learning management system, thank you for approving that, that can help deliver some of that training as well as in person, so that the conversation of equity is brought out more. It's an inclusive culture. When there's meetings, the three staff that we are don't have to go to different departments and divide up and go to these meetings. They'll have baby experts in their area, and that will demonstrate a commitment to the DEI AJ+ principles of Ann Arbor. Next is refreshing and refining all areas around accessibility, equitable, and inclusive framework. So as we are kind of solidifying in the OOE office, we're realizing some areas that haven't been addressed yet. One of the things is my PowerPoint, my portion of the PowerPoint is not very accessible. If you're an individual who has a neurodiversity around reading, right? If you have dyslexia, there's a whole lot of words and a whole lot of acronyms with not pictures, and this is the exact opposite of what I advise people to do. Take words out, put pictures in, is what you're supposed to be doing. So we want to create those languages, those rules. When you write a memo, it should always be this way, so everyone can read it, right? That's the basis of inclusion, is looking at all of those things. We also want to elevate the way that data is collected and asked, best practices. We want to revolutionize the way that we do assessments here at the city, audits, accreditations, and beyond for anyone that's interested and for some of those that aren't. It will, again, enhance our decision-making through data. So I talked about the equity belongs everywhere. It really, really is, and I've been working on this, and needs to be embedded in HR. HR is our blood of the organization. It goes everywhere. Without HR, we really, struggle with ever moving forward. So we've been training DEI opportunities for HR employees, really pulling it in and saying, this is how this would look like. And we've begun measuring and assessing if there's changes. That's going to expand the knowledge of our HR individuals and our new incoming HR director one day to look at everything through the DEI lens, look at it equitably and inclusively. And then the next area of focus is the modernization, I would call it, of recruitment. Right now, we're recruiting in a lot of 1980s, 90s ways. No shade on our recruiting staff or HR at all. They do a great job with what they have. But I come in with this expertise in this area, and I'm excited to get it going. That would start with the way that we write our job descriptions, all the way through retention and re-engagement. So in public service, one of your biggest issues with your employees is they've been here for many years doing the same job, just like on a line for any of the auto companies. You get disengaged, but you're still doing your job. And so re-engagement is part of that. The recruitment and re-engagement and retention are all areas that I look to as part of our recruitment, and it will drive institutional and systemic changes. When we can bring in individuals, younger individuals, who look at the world in a completely different way than a lot of us do, we're going to see institutional and systemic changes really happen quickly. The conversation, they walk in the door, things happen, things change. They ask, why are we walking down this path this way? And it makes everyone stop and look at it and say, oh, what's a new innovative way we can do this? So that's our hope with HR. And then horizon issues for us is an internal, so for all employees, and external equity assessment here in the city. Because there has not been a DEI office, we have not ever run a full equity, what do you think about the diversity here in the city? Give us your feedback assessment. We've got no specific data that we're working on. And so as strategic plans for other departments, this would be that as well. It would also really help us focus as a city and you as the council on allocating resources in the areas that people say it's needed. We do a great job with all the data that we have, and we go out and look and see, but where are the gaps, right? We need to find the gaps and close the gaps in the most equitable way possible. And that will increase satisfaction as it relates to the city government. It will increase transparency. It does some really amazing things when you ask the questions, show the results, show the progress or the failures, because you do fail in some areas of this, and just the continued move forward. You want to promote space to have those constructive discourses. And that's all that I have for you. Thank you very much, and it's Chief Kennedy's turn.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So a couple of horizon issues with the fire service. Emergency management falls under fire, so for a city our size, we really are at a deficit not having a turnkey emergency operations center. Especially the last year, there were multiple instances where that would have been beneficial for city staff to get together. And so we keep coming up with either natural or other incidents where that would be advantageous for us. So that it would be the primary purpose would be to function as emergency operations center. The idea would be it would also be set up so if departments needed to use it for training, it could be set up that way with the idea that, hey, you could get evicted quickly if a situation arises that we need it for something else. Of the three items that's on the list tonight, the second one, the ambulance transport, is really the one that's probably the most pressing. We're seeing nothing but an increase far beyond our initial projection for how much we are transporting with the fire department. They transported twice yesterday. We were originally thinking this was going to be kind of a it was going to be a safety net. Now it's becoming a regular occurrence, and it speaks to the need for that. One of the bigger issues for this fall is this football season is going to be unlike what we have experienced before. It's not noon games against a sleepy community college in September. Between Texas and USC, the Big Ten games that we saw at the end of the year, welcome to September, these are going to be big primetime national media coverage. For many of these games, I have the strong desire to want to be able to put on additional rigs. We don't have that capacity right now. We just have the one ambulance. We do have a kind of an emergency agreement with Dearborn. They struggle with keeping their fleet online. So that's our needed use for a second ambulance is going to become much more than what that agreement with Dearborn was ever intended to do. The proposal to Mr. Mahoney were kind of two ways, one of which could be to get a used ambulance. They're used for a reason. That comes with a host of challenges in terms of ongoing maintenance costs. The cost of a new one is also pretty expensive, so I await his and Ms. Prashan's what direction they're going to want to propose for that. But that second ambulance is really something that's very necessary and an operational need for our department. And then the other one that we're really looking for, this will not be a budget request out of general fund, but is to fund the new fire station 4 on the east side. This is the station that's currently at Platt and Huron Parkway. It would be to replace it at its current location. I know Mr. Fournier is going to touch on this. This is part of current federal earmarks. This is also on the list for state of Michigan earmarks. This is literally shovel ready. It's gone through site plan approval. We are ready to bid this project. The big one that we recently found out is we receive funding from the state of Michigan, not the University of Michigan, but the state of Michigan annually for covering public facilities. Obviously, the University of Michigan is the square footage behemoth of that, and so that funding historically was not very dependent. The state has funded that consistently for going on, I believe, 5 years now. In discussion with the bond attorney that I would refer to the finance department with, those funds are going to be eligible to bond. So that's what we would advocate is if we don't receive funding, either state or federal earmark funding for this station, or there's a balance, that we would this summer or fall explore the bond market for that, ideally with a bid the end of calendar ¡24, and there's really no reason we couldn't start construction next year. Construction costs are only going to go up. This station is truly, infrastructure's failing. We had to install a sump pump to kick the sanitary sewer out. So and just continued investment in this building is just good money after bad. So that is what I have, and Mr. Fournier.
Good evening. I will try my best to be brief. I want to talk about what our earmark requests are for this year. Federal earmark requests are being put in right now with Congress. I will start with our state appropriations. We're asking for 3 projects right now. First is finishing funding for the election center, which we still have a lot of interest and leadership in the legislature on this project, so I'm optimistic. As Chief Kennedy has said, we're also asking for funding for the fire station, $12 million total ask. I'm not convinced that there's $12 million of money in the legislature for this project, but we're asking for support in any amount that they can give us. And lastly, we're asking for funds for the Emergency Operations Center. Since our ARPA funds have been expended at the state level, there's less money to go around. So earmark opportunities certainly exist in Lansing, but they're not as bountiful as they were in the last fiscal year. So we're trying to keep that in mind and be a little more strategic about what we're asking for. On the federal side, I don't know how to say this politely, but Congress is a basket case. They haven't passed their budget from last year. However, our representatives, Representative Dingell and Senator Peters and Senator Stabenow, have asked for submissions for earmarks for the coming budget for fiscal year 25. The guidance hasn't changed this year, mostly because the guidance hasn't actually been set. So they have simply asked us to use last year's guidance to ask for projects. So we are renewing our requests from last year. They all scored very well. But because of the political machinations in D.C., we're washed out at various parts of the appropriations process. We'll be asking for $1.5 million for train station design and engineering to get the train station project moving again, $2 million to help with the Barton Pond embankment project. That's a $6.8 million project total. So we're looking for funds to help offset some of those costs. And we're also supporting a request for the tree line trail to help them kick off another round of property acquisition for their efforts at $2 million. It should be noted that there was one other ask that we asked for last year, which is funding to help support our Vision Zero efforts in the downtown to update pedestrian signals. Congresswoman Dingell, it appears, has been successful at getting that earmark request partially funded, which is a bit of a coup. There are a lot of Democrats who were shut out of earmark funding this year in Congress. And so when you see her, please thank her for her diligence. Moving forward, you've seen a lot of these projects already mentioned by staff, but we have quite a bit of capital obligations coming up in the next 10, 20 years. Replacement of the water treatment plant is important. The recycling drop-off center, major capital needs in the park system that are as yet unknown, but we know they are substantial. The tree line trail is a big project. The Barton Dam rehabilitation, all of the expenses related to our sustainability plan and the carbon neutral Ann Arbor plan, and of course the train station. Many of these projects, 4 of them by my eye, are more than $100 million projects. And so, when we ask for community project funding from the state or the federal government, that's usually funding that comes at most in a couple $1 million chunks, at most. And so we do our best to fund the priorities that we have. We look for projects that are shovel-ready and can be right-sized to that ask amount, but we also aren't shy about asking for support for the larger projects. But these larger projects are not going to be completed by some kind of saving grace of money from the federal government. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. We need to, be accumulating sources of funding from a broad spectrum in order to get these projects done. So with that, I'm proud to say I might be the shortest speaker tonight for once in my career with the City of Ann Arbor, and I will turn the microphone over to Maura Thompson.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, council members. Nice to be with you tonight. So we're going to jump right in. I always like to start with reminding everybody that the Downtown Development Authority runs two systems. We run the parking system for the city of Ann Arbor, and we run the tax increment financing system, better known as TIF. And through TIF is how we make our investments in downtown. And it's important to note that the TIF system does not support the parking system, and the parking system does not support the TIF system. So tonight, I'm going to start with the parking system. So for FY25, some of our major areas of focus in the parking system include, as I think you are all well aware, we have a proposed slate of rate increases. The DDA board will be voting on these rates at their April board meeting. Should they approve the rate increase, the rates will be implemented in June. Getting this rate increase approved is really critical for the DDA to meet the two main priorities that we have in our parking system, which is to maintain these very important city assets and to run a financially sound system. On the sustainability and energy efficient side, we are working on, in FY25, replacing 888 metal halide light fixtures in two of our structures. So the Forest Street structure and the 4th and Washington Street structure will have complete light fixture replacement. They will be replaced with LEDs that will save on our energy consumption and on our costs. We will also be replacing all of the rooftop fencing on all of our facilities. If you recall, it's been about 7 years. We started a project where we began installing fencing on all of our facilities. We began at the rooftop and we've worked our way down. Our goal was to get every level covered above level 2. We finished that this fall, and now, just as we intended to do, we're revisiting the rooftops. So the new fencing will have an enhanced design and enhanced materials. And then, as we do every year, we will be taking on about $1.6 million in annual restoration, things like, I don't need to read these all, concrete, masonry repairs, weatherproofing, a whole host of things. And all of this is in service to extend the life of these city assets. So on the horizon for the parking system, before I get into some of the highlights for the future, I have to say that all of this is predicated on parking rates being approved. Should those rate increases not be approved, our focus will look much different, and we will have some very challenging decisions to make. So being optimistic and assuming that parking rates those rates get approved, financial stewardship is something that we're always looking at in the parking system. So through our rate study, we utilized specialized software from a company called MuniWorth. They developed a modeling system where we are now able to look at the impacts that changes in utilization and changes in rates have on the financial picture of our parking system moving into the future. So we now have this really powerful budgeting tool that we can use to keep on top of changes that are occurring in the system and what's the impact. On the capital improvement side, we will continue to follow very diligently a 20-year maintenance plan. We just updated this plan to include all of those capital improvements that were deferred during the pandemic. So this is a particularly important year for that capital improvements plan because we're starting to program into outlying years all of those capital needs, including everything that was deferred. And again, the goal of this is to maximize the life of these city assets. We'll also continue on the light fixture replacement. As I mentioned, we will hit 2 structures in FY25. In outlying years, we will just continue that work throughout the system. And finally, the DDA is committed to continuing to fund the Go Pass and the Get Downtown program to encourage transit use. And this is not only to help move the needle on our very ambitious VMT goals of reducing our VMT by 50%, but the Go Pass is also a really valuable tool for our downtown employers to offer for their employees. So now we're going to move on to the TIF side. And just as a reminder, TIF is the only revenue-sharing tool we have in Michigan to make investments, infrastructure investments in our downtown. So the DDA really works hard to leverage these tax dollars to maximize the community benefit. So for FY25 on the TIF side, we are in a very intentional planning phase. And all of the initiatives in 25 are connected and coordinated with city efforts. So we are in the process of developing a new development and TIF plan. This will be a DDA plan that is in alignment with current city goals and a plan that is in alignment with state statute. State statute has changed since the last time our plan was updated in 2003. And we are doing this work really in parallel with the city's comprehensive plan. And we anticipate having this plan completed probably in June of 2025. So it's a lengthy process. The downtown area circulation study, this is a collaboration with the city. The study itself has 4 main pillars that we're looking at. However, the overall goal of the study is really to balance the demands that we're seeing placed on our downtown streets. The recommendations that come from this study will inform future capital investments for the DDA, which in turn will inform our development plan. Energy utility study. This is a collaboration with our colleagues in the Office of Sustainability, and I believe you all just approved at your last council meeting the energy utility study contract. Shortly, you will be seeing a cost share from the DDA. Coming your way. We are participating in funding a portion of this study because amongst the many things this study is going to look at, it will be looking at identifying locations for geothermal in our downtown. So again, the recommendations from this energy utility study will inform our future work, which will inform our development plan. We'll also continue in FY25 on working with our colleagues at the city on defining maintenance responsibilities in our downtown. So we've been working on determining who takes care of what elements in our downtown, and the goal really is to identify gaps in maintenance and also look at things that perhaps the city is currently maintaining where maybe it might make more sense for the DDA to take over some of those things. And again, this is all in service of preparing for our new development plan. And finally, in 25, we have a major focus on data collection. So we recently subscribed to 2 data services, Placer AI and Replica. We are also installing additional counters along our bikeway streets. And what we're looking to do with this data is to really understand pandemic recovery trends downtown and the outcomes of our projects. And we've just kind of dipped our toe into the water on looking into this data. There's just so much. And I'm actually going to bring, I'll be here Monday night doing a DDA update, and I'm going to bring you all a sample of what we're seeing. I think you'll find it really interesting. And so on the TIF side, on the horizon, the pandemic taught us many lessons. One of the lessons that we learned was the importance of having a resilient downtown. And by resilient, I mean resilient to crisis, whether it be health-related, whether it be climate-related, whether it be economic. So we are focusing our efforts into the future on doing what we can to ensure that we have a resilient downtown, and by focusing on the areas I'm going to talk about. So placemaking and vibrancy. I think we all know that really what we need to make a downtown vibrant is people. And in order to attract people, we must invest in quality of life infrastructure. I recently read an article about the path to prosperity in Michigan, and one of the things they talked about was we need to really shift the way we're looking at economic development from kind of the traditional, we need to attract businesses, to we need to get a concentration of talent. So basically what we want to do is, what will bring young, talented people here? What are they looking for in a community? And I think what they're looking for, and I think the data shows what they're looking for, is walkability. They're looking for places that are safe to bike. They're looking for transit-rich communities. They're looking for communities that have a certain experience. So investing in placemaking is very important. A20, we know that we have very ambitious climate neutrality goals, and we also know that our infrastructure projects can help move the needle on some of these goals. Again, the recommendations from the studies we talked about on the previous slide are really going to inform the work we do. And I also think, and I know you all haven't talked about it yet, but the MDOT jurisdictional transfer study, just keep in mind that 17% of those trunk lines are within the DDA. So just, another possibility. Vision Zero, street redesign, two-way restoration, separated bikeways. We know that all of these things contribute to safer and more comfortable streets, and we are committed to continuing our work to try to advance Vision Zero. On the affordability side, we'll be continuing to work with our partners at the Housing Commission. We are always looking for ways or opportunities where we can coordinate our infrastructure work so that we are supporting the work that the Housing Commission is doing. 121 Catherine and 350 South Fifth are great examples of this, and we will continue to work with them on those efforts. And then, of course, we're committed to our housing grants. And typically, those housing grants, although they've been used for many things, typically they're safeguarding existing units in our downtown, which is really critical. And finally, on the horizon for the DDA, when we're thinking about challenges, our biggest challenge will be revenue constraints. In 2017, the DDA's TIF capture was capped. Our growth is limited to 3.5% a year. And just to give you a little perspective of that, in FY25, the TIF capture above the cap will be 27% of that total capture. By 2032, it will be 49% of the capture, and it continues to escalate. So we know that we will not have a shortage of projects, but we will be challenged to really prioritize which projects we move forward with. And that is all I have, and I think Ms. Hall is up next.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm just going to highlight some of the big picture issues that we're working on. Number one, affordable housing development. The Housing Commission's budget is about $50 million a year, but only a small percent of that is part of the general fund. We receive $160,000 annually from general fund, and we receive about $8 million from the county mental health millage plus the affordable housing millage. So most of our funding is actually not part of the city's budget, but just a reminder, all of our FTEs are in the city's budget, paid for with general fund and then reimbursed with our funding sources. So on the affordable housing development side, we will be breaking ground at Catherine in April. You will be invited to our groundbreaking ceremony once we pick a date. You will all be invited. We're hoping to own the property at the end of March or the first week of April, and then we're right away going to start with our groundbreaking. 350 South Fifth. We actually had interviews with our two top candidates today for co-developers, so we will have someone selected in the next couple weeks. So we'll be moving forward on that project. On March 18th, 123 West Summit is on the agenda for sale. It's a small portion of 721 North Main. And at Ashley Street, IHN Family Shelter has moved their offices in. They've been there for a couple weeks. Hopefully you've also been invited to their open house where they've been able to move their administrative offices out of their shelter and have expanded their family The other issues that we're working on is how to finance all of these projects. And of course, the affordable housing millage is a huge help with gap financing. And also on March 18th, there's a agenda item for your consideration to do bond financing with our Catherine project, which will enable us to build more housing sooner in the next few years and leverage the millage to pay back the bond over the life of the millage over the next 18 years. The other big issue that we are working on is the services provided to our residents. A large majority of the funding that is used to pay our nonprofits that do on-site services, as well as with our voucher tenants, is through the county's mental health millage. That passes through our department and then on to our nonprofits. And after we're done, I'm going to just hand out a sheet, or I can email it to you as well, all the different nonprofits, then why and where they're funded at, so you have an idea. Some of our horizon issues, a big one is the county mental health millage. Last Wednesday, the county started discussions, the county board started discussions about reissuing that on the November 2024 ballot, or re-upping it and requesting it to be funded. But there's a lot of discussion on potential changes as to what actually will be covered by that millage. That is 100% of the funding that's in our affordable housing bucket of the 40-40-20 split is passed through to our nonprofits for services. So if we do not renew that millage, it have a very big impact on the properties that we have and the tenants that we work with. The second one is the marijuana rebate funds. It's not really part of the general funds, but it does impact the work that we do and our partners in the community. Last week, there was a summary of the different projects that were council initiatives and how you wanted to spend the marijuana rebate funds. And so I just provided a 6-month update on what those funds were spent on and how they were utilized. Largest program was a new initiative called that the community that is working on it called Rising Hope. And that is for trauma-informed case management services for families that have vouchers that are in the justice system somehow, criminal justice system. There was funding for a variety of youth programs, probably many of which you have heard of, as well as eviction prevention funding, and then some funding for our Catherine Street project for the non-residential part of our project. The other horizon issue is really doing this extra development, and we've secured a lot of new grants outside of the city, has caused a strain on my staff, both in having enough staff to do the work, as well as having space for people to actually do the work, both on our offices and our maintenance facility. We do have quite a few FTEs that are in the budget, all of which would be paid for with funding that we secure outside of the general fund. And so we don't fill those positions until there's the immediate need for them, and then we have the funding for them. So when a property comes online and we have revenue coming in to pay for, property management, maintenance, and financial services is the primary items. We are continuing to look for a permanent place for us to expand our services and consolidate our offices. We have most of our offices are between Miller Manor as well as South Industrial, and we don't have room between those spaces for all of our staff. And so those are our main items that we're thinking about in the future. Thank you.
So you had a lot of information thrown at you. I can tell by the looks on your faces. It's been a lot. Everybody's here for questions. I know by the rules, we have a hard stop in 7 minutes. I don't know how you want to handle it. I don't know if anybody's here for public comment, but we're ready to answer questions. If you ask your question, the appropriate person will step up here and answer it, and then I'll come back and close it out whenever we're done.
Are there questions? Councilmember Dish? Perhaps, if I may interrupt briefly, perhaps to relieve the suspense, I guess what I'd suggest we do is we run through questions, and in the if indeed someone shows up for public comment, we'll either hear them or push them all to the end. But y'all are here, so there is public comment. Great. Well, we'll have one or two public comments at 8:45, and then roll back with questions since y'all are here and we all are here. Councilmember Dish, my apologies.
No need. Thank you, staff. That was pretty amazing. I have actually two questions for Ms. Thompson. You mentioned that 17% of the trunk lines are within the DDA, and I wanted to ask, how do you imagine partnering with us to develop the financial capacity to take these over, or what were you thinking about in flagging that for us? And then, I'm sorry, but I just need you to go through what the last thing you said a little more slowly. So by 2032, the TIF capture above the DDA's cap will be 40% of the TIF capture. I'm just confused
Right,
how
so-
that can be. Yeah.
Sure. So by 2032, and now I'm going to give you rough numbers because I don't know them off the top of my head, but the total TIF capture will be, I'm going to say between 20 and 22 million. And the split will be the DDA would receive 51% of that, which will be about, I don't know, 10 or 11 million, and the amount above the cap would be 49% of that. So I'm kind of making up the dollar figures, but the amount above the DDA's capture will be 49% of the total capture. And in terms of the MDOT jurisdictional transfer study, depending on the direction that council goes, because there are parts of those trunk lines that are within our district by statute, we could either participate in funding, participate in projects. So we could be a partner on those. It just depends on what council decides and what direction that goes in. But we certainly are eligible to be a potential partner.
Further questions? Councilmember Harrison.
Thank you, and thank you all for your presentations this evening. This question is for Ms. Hall. Couple questions. Thank you. I know you did provide a summary for us, which on the programs that were utilized with the marijuana excise tax revenue. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on the impact of each of these programs, if you could.
I think they're each quite different from each other in that the Rising Hope program, what we did was we gathered the various nonprofits, the sheriff, and others who work in this area and said, how would you create a program where you would collaborate with each other? So there's different agencies that do stuff on their own, like Catholic Social Services, SOS, and we brought them together, and they created the program together, also with the Washington Housing Alliance. And so they created a system to coordinate and determine who was best at certain parts of running the program. And so I think of all the programs, it is one that has a structure to it. Whereas, for example, the youth programs were all existing nonprofits that had existing programs that we were able to supplement and add to and enable them to expand what they were doing, some of which had overlapping collaboration and some of which are sort of standalone. And the way those ended up being funded was, again, I reached out to the entities that we work with the most, that we know serve the most low-income youth in the community, which was Can, Peace, and Avalon. And then in talking to them, they recommended other organizations that are also youth programming, and they all sort of supported each other in how those were funded. The eviction prevention was intended originally to be collaboration with the county in putting funds into an eviction prevention program. That county funds, I'm not even sure yet if those have, I think they're just now becoming available. So those got spent by the city, our portion of the funds, without having the county as part of that partnership. Ours went so fast. And that's exactly what it sounds like, is eviction prevention, where there is somebody who is going to lose their housing. They're about to be evicted through the court process, and what they need is actual funds to pay back owed rent or court fees or that kind of thing. And then the third one, or the fourth one, sorry, Catherine Street, 150 was for all the work, like the architect, engineer, the designing, the community engagement related to the non-residential part of our development, because we can't spend our residential funds on our non-residential portion. And then a one-time $325,000 was for the physical build-out and construction of the space. And in my report last month, I requested renewal of these projects, but obviously that is up to you on what you prioritize and how you want to look at that. Any of them can be scaled up or down, depending on what funding is available.
Okay, thank you. I think I do have a follow-up question.
Okay.
You, for the Rising Hope program, you referenced that there is an average of 15 families per month that's receiving services. Is that, speak a little bit about the growth, I guess, of, do you see that more families, or do you see that growing need, or
I think,
is that?
Yeah, I think the growth happened about in the third or fourth month, because it took a couple months just to bring people together and talk about, you know, how do we make referrals? How do we keep confidentiality? How do we track things like that? What are we tracking? What are we doing? So it took a couple months before the program was up and running. And then it was about letting the community know that this service was available. It is not just for folks who have vouchers through the Housing Commission. There's other vouchers in the community that are administered through other entities, and we've included that, those other voucher families as well. And so now it's really folks hearing about it, getting into one of the groups that are doing the actual programming, and some are quick and easy. I don't know, nothing's easy, but more straightforward, and some are much longer term and more complicated. And I would expect people to have reasons to come back and use different types of services. It's a very broad, client-specific services. So it could be anything from help with a security deposit, help with mental health issues, help with financial issues. It could be with youth in the program, it could be with adults in the program, so it's very wide what can be covered.
Okay, great. So it's pretty broad, and do we have any data yet on, I mean, really the question I guess I'm wondering is it helping to keep people housed? I mean, that was what the overall goal was to help keep individuals who are out in the community and not living in supportive, within supportive service, services, to kind of keep them housed, so.
Yes, and I actually have new data that I will forward to City Council that I totally forgot I was going to do that. I just got it last week.
Okay, great.
Yep,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
Thank you so much.
We now come to public comment, general time. Public comment, general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment, general time, you need not have signed up in advance, but speakers in all instances, both here in the chamber and online, will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you, or the time clock will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. First, I want to apologize for interrupting the conversations, but thank you for giving me a moment to speak. My name is Heather Zielinski, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Autism Society of Greater Detroit. I came tonight because I wanted to be able to introduce our organization to this city and to the council that serves it. About 8 years ago, there was a handful of small affiliates in Michigan. They were related to the Autism Society, the national organization. National had shut those doors, closed down those individual operations, did a little bit of a restructuring, and came back with a model that allowed for one affiliate for each state. The Autism Society of Greater Detroit is that one affiliate. We're completely volunteer-led, and that means that we have to currently focus our services on the 5 closest counties, so Macomb, Wayne, Oakland, St. Clair, and Washtenaw counties. However, with the support of our community and members such as you guys, we'll be able to spread our services to accommodate the needs of the state of Michigan over the next 5 years. Our main purpose is to be able to connect between service organization, state services, and the individuals that are impacted by autism, as well as other neurodiversities. We offer resources 24/7 through our website, as well as through our referral service. We hold events such as resource expos, training for professionals or organizations that want to interact with the autistic community. We have adult social club meetups, vaccination clinics for those that are overwhelmed with traditional medical settings, peer support groups, and more. As we help the community, we're able to find and connect with resources that are available to them. Sometimes we're also able to identify gaps, services that just aren't available in the state of Michigan. In those instances, we would write a grant, and then we would partner with community organizations that exist to create things that fill the gap for those individuals. If you have an opportunity that we can partner with you guys or partner with the city to be able to come on board on some of those events, we would love that opportunity to be able to make our name and our mission a little bit more well-known. Obviously, you can contact me directly. I'll leave some information at the end of the table. Or visit our website, which is autismsocietygreaterdetroit.org. Overall, I just look forward to being able to work with each of you and each of the cities in our state to be able to help every individual live life more fully. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in House who would like to speak at public comment? Is there anyone online who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, no one has their hand raised.
Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Councilmember Ackman.
Thank you. I have a question for Chief Kennedy. You had mentioned an increase in the ambulance transport needs, and I was just wondering why you think that is. I mean, maybe you could refresh my memory on why we got it in the first place, and why maybe the need has increased with Huron Valley still at play.
Sure. The reasons for the increase are the same reasons we got into it. There's a national paramedic shortage. It's even more pronounced for private EMS. Fire departments are actually struggling with recruiting, which a decade ago would have been unheard of. We're still very fortunate in our city being somewhat of a destination department, but the issues that are confronting HVA are national issues, and it's really just staffing. So we're finding that just we're getting called when they go to zero status, that they don't have units available. We're also finding that as our staff are becoming more comfortable with this, because this is a new thing for them, we have some protocol ability where if it's a patient that doesn't, if a patient meets certain thresholds, we can cancel HVA and transport ourselves. And what that helps system-wide is that frees up an advanced unit for a more critical care patient. So this is really having I mean, the intent is for the city, but it's truly having a county-wide impact that we're taking care of the low acuity patients. So the higher acuity patients, the paramedic resources are available. So their staffing has continued, their staffing needs have continued to struggle, and our staff has become more familiar with it, which is really kind of all pointing to that increase, so.
Follow-up question. Now that we're going to be charging fees, as I don't think we have until recently.
Correct.
Will that help us, how much, to what degree will that help us fund the actual service?
So working with finance, the fees are meant to be cost neutral. Cost recovery, thank you. Thank you, cost recovery. Once we get about 90 days into that, literally at the last meeting, the funds were approved. We're still working with our third-party provider. There's a tremendous amount that needs to get set up with Medicare, Medicaid billing. It's quite a mountain to get all that set up. So really to be determined. I wish I had a better answer for you. We did try to put some preliminary data together that will be used as part of the upcoming budget. So, yeah.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks. A couple questions for Mr. Steglitz. Thank you so much for coming up, and thanks for all the presentations. I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to the FTE addition for the plan review. I think you mentioned that was coming from, it was going to maybe offset what we've been spending on consulting. I don't know if that was, the intent would be, we'd be using some of those funds to pay for the FTE, or if we also are going to need the consulting.
The intent would be to have an offset, so the FTE would offset the cost of the consulting support.
Mm-hmm.
To the degree whether we would still need to use consulting support to augment our staff, it would be sort of TBD depending upon what the demand on the services are. Right now, that's a full FTE. We would anticipate that would begin to shrink as we brought another person on board.
Okay, great. And then I know you were presenting for Dr. Stoltz for the MEU, but just in terms of that phase 2 study, could you speak to where the funding, where that was anticipated to come from? Was that general? Was that?
That's a good question, and I'd rather address it at April.
Okay. Okay. And then could you speak a little bit more to the separation or the dams being funded partially through parks? I didn't quite recognize that funding arrangement existed, and kind of historically, what was the thinking behind that?
Historically, Ms. Prashant may be better suited to answer that question, but I'll start with my recollection. Originally, the dams were all funded out of the water system. Is that true? No. Going back? Back? Okay. So we also had a hydro fund. At some point, some time ago, the revenue for the 2 hydro facilities, which are Barton Superior, was decided to bring those into the general fund. Barton was always split 50-50 between the water fund and the general fund, again, because of, again, it provides the impoundment for the water supply. The 2 other dams, Argo and Gettys, because basically they serve as recreational purposes, were added to the parks fund. And that's the history, and that's where it currently sits.
Okay, that's what I assumed. I just wanted to make sure I was making the correct assumptions on that.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's it for that. Thank you. And then I just wanted to make one, I guess, general comment pertaining to, for Mr. Delacourt, you had mentioned, sorry, scrolling through my notes so I remember what it is. You mentioned around the parks, or for funding for the parks, that no silver bullet's going to address the funding needs. One of the pieces was taking a look at properties and potentially how those can meet other council priorities. I guess I would just hope that also that's being thought of as also meeting parks priorities. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Cornell.
My first question is for Ms. Thompson. And thank you to city staff for being here and for your presentations tonight. When you mentioned the parking system on the horizon, you said that the work that you wanted to do is in some way predicated by the increase in the parking rate increase going up. I'm asking you to look in a crystal ball, and I realize that's not clear, that's not fair, so I'm going to say that right now. But do you know of these, because there's 4 priorities here, do you know, have any inclination what might need to fall off if that parking rate increase does not go through?
I would say if the parking rate increase does not go through, we would take a holistic look at our parking system and probably work with our engineers and reprioritize things. I mean, I couldn't pick out one thing, but we would certainly, maintaining the safety of our facilities, would rise right to the top. So we would take care of critical infrastructure issues first and probably work our way down.
Thank you for that. And then I wanted to, I guess, confirm, because you know what the TIF capture will be, so you can anticipate that revenue. So I assume that everything that is on your TIF system list we have the funding for that?
Well, when you're talking about the TIF system and we're talking about what's on the horizon, those projects are unknown. Our only planned project right now is the 4th Ave project in 2026. That is programmed. Everything else is going to be based on the work that we are doing this year in planning. So from the circulation study, from the energy utility study, from our base level of service work that we're doing with the city, potentially the MDOT jurisdictional study, the comprehensive plan. I mean, there are all of these things that we collectively are doing as a city. And we know, we can estimate what our TIF capture is. Given the cost of goods and services and the increased costs in construction that we are seeing, we certainly won't be able to fulfill all of the potential opportunities that could come our way.
I think the one thing that, when you talk about quality of life infrastructure and sort of the things that we want to do from an economic development perspective to advance the city, that feels precarious to me. And so I think that's something to really think about as we look at the budget as a holistic framework. How do we prioritize that piece of it in relation to all the other things that we want to do?
Yeah, and as staff, looking on the horizon is our main concern, and as we do this really important work with this development plan, and we will be engaging with all of you. We actually just hired our consultant team at our last DDA board meeting in March, so you're going to start hearing from us, and I have to just give a plug. Beginning tomorrow, the comprehensive plan, the circulation study, and the development plan public engagement does start at the library. 3 days of workshops. a2dda.org homepage has a link to all the times. I won't bore you with the details, but we're certainly going to be talking about exactly what you're saying.
Thank you. My other question is for Chief Kennedy. In your comments to, I think Councilmember Ackman kind of asked the question I was going to ask, so I apologize if this feels duplicative, but when you talked about the increased demand for ambulance services, I'm not sure if you're saying that there's actually more emergencies happening, or if it's just that the staffing for HVA is not keeping up with sort of what the usual is, and then we're having to step in and fill in that void.
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a significant increase of calls from calendar year 2023 to 2024. A big chunk of that was with the multiple storm events, but secondary to the storm events was the increase of EMS responses, and that was, out of all of our responses, the most. Even with the storm events, September was our busiest calendar month and always is our busiest calendar month, and that coincides with 12,000 freshmen and a bunch of home games that we are repeating this year. And what is becoming, again, that September always being the busiest month, a lot of those home games in September had been that noon kickoff, which always we see the least demand of. Noon games are always an extreme stress on emergency services for the city. The noon games in September were always ones that we took a little bit of sigh of relief with. The USC and the Texas game, there's no way those are going to be noon games for where the markets are. And so we're going to see the increase of emergency services calls dramatic. And For most home games, daily, we do between 20 to 30 calls a day. A typical OSU or MSU had always kind of been the peak number of calls we would do every year, and those would be 100 plus. And so we're expecting those 100 plus call days to be, instead of 2 games a year, we're probably looking at 4 or 5 games a year now. So that's what we're trying to get ahead of, and being able to at least turn on another rig will make a dramatic difference for us to address those peak demands.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Galciano.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Laura Orta. Hi. Can you, well, firstly, thank you for your report. It was very informative, and it was really great to see some of the things that you're thinking about in the future. I was wondering if you can elaborate on how the new accessibility coordinator, Tracy Bird, is being utilized and the impact of her position on the city's ability to address accessibility concerns.
Absolutely. So Tracy's been on board for about 6 months, and she's seeing more traffic than I am around diversity and equity. She is a conduit for the citizens and our Commission on Codi and individuals within the city. There's one of the things she's diving into are our transition plans. Parks and Rec just did that really big study, and they're dedicating 30 years to it. Our transition plans are old enough that we need to, in most of our buildings, start looking at least bringing us up to date for the 2010 changes in the laws. We're allowed to stay with where we created that transition plan, but there will soon be people coming and talking to us about that, is what we're hearing from Department of Justice and the Michigan disability groups. Tracy is taking in all of the feedback and utilizing the tools that we have right now for answering the issues, but there are many, and we're also absolutely partnering with areas like DDA and, the comprehensive plan, because making certain that we're bringing access there is, she's got her eye on all of it. So I'd say that she's able to do a lot and explain a lot to individuals who have already done an amazing job here, our city employees, but there's a lot for all of us to learn. And to implement some of the changes, there's still some steps that have to happen that we're looking to streamline a little better.
Thank you. I have one quick follow-up question. You talked a little bit about, I think it was Equity Champions?
Yeah, the OOE
Yeah,
ambassadors,
if you could just elaborate that on a little bit, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely. So right now, to have, if a staff has a meeting on anything, let's say, Brian, they sit down and talk about water and the water mains and things that need to happen, someone at the table needs to have at least a percentage expertise of what we have, we being the Office of Org Equity, on thinking about marginalized, that's why we call them marginalized individuals, because they're individuals that we haven't thought of primarily when we have done anything in this world. And so training individuals to ask the questions, well, what about, right? We kind of joke that we're the uncomfortable questioning asking group within the city, and so training these individuals under a curriculum that we're creating with the certifications that we have, and my expertise in teaching this subject for years, these individuals will be able to represent. And then looking at the equity report that's related to Resolution 18 to something that we submit to council quarterly, we want to have more substantial data to that. And those individuals will be able to say, they'll give us that really micro view of what's happening in each area, so we can report that out better to all of you.
Thank you. You know, I thought it was referring to like a disability champions effort.
Yes.
Just, you know, kind of training at least one member of each commission to have an ADA or accessibility lens so they can point out things in different commissions.
Yep,
But we can talk about it more.
Yep, but that's absolutely, you know, the DEIAJ plus.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, before turning it over to Mr. Honey, I'd like to, thank staff members, one and all, for coming in. For coming in. Good luck. I'm thanking you for coming into the building in which you work. Well, darn it, I'm going to thank you anyway. It is, I think what we hear, what I see, and I think the council sees, and members of the public who have the pleasure of watching us see, is a set of professionals who come in every day and just work their butts off to think about how they can improve services and enhance quality of life for the residents of the city of Ann Arbor. They do so with grace and vision, and they do so in a resource-constrained environment. We all we're operating here in Michigan, where the political culture over the decades has disinvested in local government and government itself, and that is difficult for progressive communities such as ours that are doing everything they can to help and provide outstanding places and spaces for residents and community members. But we are doing it, you all are doing it, and for my part, I couldn't be more grateful. Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a couple of observations before I give the commercial again about questions. The one thing that Chief Kennedy did not mention that will be a factor in the run volume, the University of Michigan is introducing alcohol sales starting fall with football. Right, Chief?
Yes, sir.
So when you factor the drinking that'll go on before the game, all during the game, and after the game, trained professionals, we just know your run volume's going to go up. I mean, even the hip-hop people believe that. Timing was perfect.
It's all good.
It's my train of thought. I will not say this will be a top priority or the top priority. I don't like to throw characterizations around like that. But the one thing that our city does not have, and in my professional opinion, must get, is the Emergency Operations Center. If we don't get funding from some source, state or federal, I need to be transparent. I've got to make that happen because we've been lucky. We've had incidents that have come up, weather-related. I don't know that we would have needed to activate it when the explosion happened, but there's a lot of uncertainty that happens within a community. And the way that we do it now, we have perfected the art of talking through Teams or in group chats. That's not the way to really handle an emergency. You have to have that center. We need the synergy. It's got to be hardwired. And we need to be in the same physical space to properly respond. So if we're through with a group meeting, when seconds matter, you need to be able to turn to your colleague and say, what about this, and what are we going to do about that? Today, we can't really do that. So it will be on the top, near the top of our radar until we get it done. If somebody else can pay for it, fantastic. But if they can't, then we've got to figure it out. You're happy now, right? Questions. So again, April 15th at the front part of the council meeting will be when you will actually get the proposed budget. We ask that you submit your budget questions in writing, that they come to Sarah, Kim Busselmeyer, Marty, and myself. They will all be collected. Answers will be developed for your questions. If we can't get an answer by Friday, it's going to roll over to the next week, because we'll do the report every Friday. Here's all the questions we have, here's all the answers we have, and we'll do that throughout the budget process. I think we also, where's Sarah, don't you post it somewhere? On the webpage. So the public can see what's been asked and what's been answered. If there's no last questions, we wish you a good evening. Sorry we didn't have snacks tonight, but we had to buy clocks, so it's a toss-up.
We have a motion to adjourn, moved by Ackman Briggs. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.